submit any questions you may have for our speaker throughout the question and answer box session provided. And so, as I have provided the introduction for our discussion for today, it is my honor to welcome you with our moderator who will lead our discussion, Ms. Natania Azalia. Ms. Natania is currently a junior research assistant of the ASEAN Center for Energy. And alongside Ms. Natania, I would like to welcome our guest for today's discussion, Mr. Luis Fernández Intriago. Hence, without further ado, I would like to invite Ms. Natania to take over the session. Ms. Natania, I'll hand the over session to you.
Thank you very much, Aisha, for the very warm welcome. So, hello everyone. Welcome back to the ARNECC Paper Talks. My name is Tanya, and I'll be moderating today's session. It's been a while since our last paper talk, and I'm glad that we're back and with the new team of Just and Inclusive Energy Transition. And today we are exploring a very interesting and timely topic. As we know, the shift to a low carbon economy is not only a technological or environmental challenge, but also a deeply social and economic one. And while new opportunities are emerging, the transition is also reshaping jobs, livelihoods, and communities. The question now is how do we make sure that people, the workforce, are not left behind in the energy transition? And to answer this question, joining us today is Luis Fernández Intriago, economist at the Environmental Defense Fund, who will be sharing his published commentary titled Overcoming 5 Key Challenges to Make the Energy Transition a Just Labor Transition. And to give you a little bit of background, Luce's work centers on the just labor transition, power system transformations, and the economic impacts of clean energy policies. He is a member of the management team of the RESET Network for South-led Just Energy Transitions and the editor of the EDF's Economics Discussion Paper Series. And previously, he held postdoctoral fellowship at the Resources for the Future and advised the Mexican Deputy Minister of Finance. He also holds a PhD in economics from the W.P. Carey School of Business at Arizona State University. So hi, Louis, how are you?
I'm really excited to be here. Thank you.
That's great. Are you ready for your presentation?
I am.
All right, I'll pass over the stage to you. So please.
Thank you so much. So, first of foremost, thank you, Nathania, and thank you for the Asian Center of Energy and the ACEPT team for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be part of the ARNECC Paper Talks, especially at this series focused on just and inclusive energy transitions, as you mentioned, which is exactly the type of work it's about. So I'm Luis Armando Fernández Intriago, as you mentioned, an economist at the Environmental Defense Fund and a member of the management team of the RESET Network for Solutions for South-led Just Energy. Today, I will be presenting this commentary, which was published in Nature Communications and co-authored with 17 colleagues from across the globe. So why just labor transition? Let me start with the core tension. From one side, we have the undeniable imperative, achieving the net zero by 2050 requires transforming energy, transport, housing, agriculture, and manufacturing, all within the next about 25 years. That's an enormous undertaking. On the other side, we have a real risk. If you don't address how this transformation affects workers and their communities, we're going to face resistance. People will oppose the transition, not because they don't care about the climate, but because they're worried about their livelihoods, and that resistance will delay climate action. And it exacerbates inequalities and erode the social licenses we need to move forward. But there's the opportunity. A just labor transition offers a path where they don't have to choose between climate action and their livelihoods and workers' well-being. Strategic policies can prepare workers and new jobs, enable inclusive decision-making, and secure social license for change. In our paper, we said a successful energy transition must recognize people's importance while boosting productivity, reducing emissions. It is much a social and an economic challenges and an environmental one. And that is why we also conclude that the global transition will need to be just or will not be just transition. So a little bit about how this paper came out. This paper started with a scoping research that we did with Brigitte, Mingu, and Raphael. And what we did there, we did a 14 country analysis. So 7 developed countries and 7 developing countries to understand what were the policies that have they enacted in terms of labor transitions. So in particular, the seven developed countries have had a little bit of a head start. In particular, they have gone through a little bit of the cold transition, and then the developing countries were starting, and we wanted to understand how advanced they were and so on. So and then from there, once we have a landscape, and we have something that we can show as something that is that could be like a first ground step, we convene a dialogue where we interview over 30 global experts on labor markets and energy transitions across the global north and global south. And then from that we then have an actual dialogue where the 18 participants, including me in all the co-authors, we have 4 sessions to discuss these issues. And from that discussion, it came the 5 challenges framework, which is we synthesize it into a commentary and publish it in Nature Communications. And you can see the list of it's a long list of co-authors, but they were all participants in the dialogue where we discussed. And it was really intentional that we spanned across different disciplines. We included people from economics, professors in economics and so on, but people that have been previously in trade unions or in people that have led utilities, and also people that were at that time working for governments as the European Commission and so on. So it was like a robust set of different experiences, people from NGOs, but also people from universities and practitioners. So it was a robust set of group to understand the impacts of the energy transition for workers and how to ensure that it's a just transition. So what are the 5 challenges at a glance? I will go then one by one, but there's limited overlap between the new jobs and the previous jobs. So in some sense, that's a big issue. Green jobs not necessarily occur in the same location, require the same skills, and at the same time as the jobs get displaced. We have a lot of people both from global south and global north in our discussion. So we identified that many times traditionally we have tried to implement policies from the north to the south, but it is not the case that the developed countries policies often fail in the developing context. And then we also focus a lot on the fact that informal workers are overlooked. Over 60% of global workforce exclude from conventional policies, and that place-based policies, which are industrial policies, are really important, but they have been ineffective in the past. And we need to be aware of that, and that the rehabilitation programs have mixed track records. Lastly, and a big one too, is like the financing gap. So the transition costs $200 trillion globally through 2050. So there's a big chunk of money that is needed, and within that, we have to protect the workers and consider that. So let's dip a little bit deeper. The first challenge is perhaps the most counterintuitive. We heard a lot about how the energy transition will create millions of jobs, and it's true. The International Energy Association net zero scenario projects 14 million new clean energy jobs by 2030, against only 5 million lost in fossil fuels. And it sounds positive, right? But the reality is much more complicated. Evidence from the US shows that only about 1% of workers leaving brown industries since 2020 actually transitioned to green jobs. Workers from fossil fuels jobs are more likely to move to other dirty jobs than to new green job ones. And why? Because the skill sets don't match. Green jobs systematically require different competencies, particularly soft skills, communication and negotiation, where fossil fuels workers tend to have the gaps. So there's a silver lining throughout. A green wage premium of 7 to 21% for workers in the green jobs to tend to earn a little bit more, and that's a potential incentive. The solution here is we need to go beyond just clean energy retraining. We need to prepare workers for diverse sectors, align with local economic opportunities, and critically, we need credible long-term transition policies that give economic actors the confidence to invest in the right skills and education. So the challenge to the labor market solutions from high-income countries will not always work well in low and middle-income countries. So the second challenge is really important for this audience. Labor market policies that were designed in developed countries with their established training, infrastructure, social safety nets, and formal employment don't automatically transfer to the global south context. In the global north, you have fiscal space, strong institutions, formal labor markets. The challenges are different. Skills mismatch, political resistance, trust deficits. Think of the Appalachian region, the coal region in the US, in the global south, and is this related relevant, I think, to Asian, is the fact that you're dealing with limited training infrastructure, large informal sectors, heavy fossil fuel dependence for both revenue and energy access, and constrained fiscal space with competing development priorities. The key message is that there's no one-size-fits-all climate policy. That's the big takeaway, but packages for delivering a just labor transition can be implemented. Indonesia and Vietnam are perfect examples. They are navigating the JTPs, just energy transition partnerships, while managing large informal workforces and coal dependence. Their solutions need to be context specific. So challenge 3, the needs of informal workers might be overlooked under conventional labor market policies. As I mentioned, over 60% of the global workforce is informal, 90% in the low-income countries, 76 to 80% informal labor in Vietnam and in India. So there are really a key thing. Even emission-intensive sectors like coal mining has informal employment and is insignificant. These workers lack the social protection, earn low wages, work in poor conditions, have limited access to education and training, and are vulnerable to exploitation. And here's the critical point to conventional labor market policies. Unemployment insurance, retraining programs, pension schemes are designed for formal sector that excludes informal workers by design. The solutions involve investing in general education to prepare workers for higher quality jobs, expanding social security through mechanisms like cash transfers or guarantee employment programs, and creating upskilling pathways to help workers transition into formal employment. So challenge 4, place-based industrial policies have frequently been ineffective. That's a big one. Many times government choose winners and not necessarily the correct winners. So this is uncomfortable but important. Many place industrial policies have simply not worked. Studies show that rehabilitation programs targeting economically distressed areas have frequently failed to create lasting employment or stimulate a long-term growth. But here's the thing, most workers are not keen to reallocate their community. They have ties to the fossil fuel regions, are typically strong, and mobility has been declining. So place-based solutions are essential, even though their track record is mixed. While does this seem to work? Inclusive governance structures that give workers and communities a genuine decision-making power. So it's important to consider what the communities and the workers need. Vietnam is a good example. Its labor code requires employment consultations with unions during restructuring, and the enterprise support laws helps first retrain workers. And then a really example that I really emphasize and I really like, and if you have a chance, it's a good example to start. I know it's from a developed country. Nonetheless, I think they do an excellent job. It's the Spain's just transition strategy for the coal regions. Involves their unions, their local governments, and affected communities in designing regional plans and specific regional plans depending in which area of the country they are. So I think that's a big takeaway that I will give. So both Spain and Vietnam have really interesting cases that are worth studying. The lesson, multidimensional approaches are needed, a strategic industrial policy combined with upskilling anchored in inclusive governance. So the challenge 5, and as I said, this is a biggie. Implementing the necessary policies requires substantial financial resources. So the IPCC says that 3 to 6% of world's GDP annually is needed to do the low carbon investments that we need. So that's a big chunk of money. Reskilling workers, enhancing social protection, economic diversification, infrastructure development, all of these require significant public funds and physical space in constraint everywhere, but especially in developing countries. So several financing mechanisms exist. Carbon markets, public-private partnerships, the Just Energy Transition Partnerships, and climate finance from multilateral development banks. For Asian context, JTPs in Indonesia and Vietnam are particularly relevant. There has been 20 million for Indonesia and 15 $8.5 billion respectively to Vietnam, the largest among current partnerships, but there's mechanisms haven't yet yielded the necessary incentives to full economic transformation, and we need to steer these partnerships to include elements of market access to ensure that financing mechanisms themselves reflect justice. So, and here, and in a bad note, the U.S. withdrew these commitments, but that actually incentivize other countries like Germany to step in and chip actually more money. So South Africa initially their arrangement was 8.5, and since US withdraw, they even increased their amount to 12.8 billion. So a little bit to give some Asian context about Indonesia and Vietnam. So both of which we analyzed in our 14-country comparison study using the Just Labor Transition Progress Scale. Indonesia is at the moderate stage at our Just Labor Transition Progress Scale. Coal is 1.2% of GDP with 150,000 direct jobs, and 60% of the labor force is informal in Indonesia. Indonesia has included just transition principle in their indices and long-term strategies, and has the largest JTP that I mentioned in the slide before. But a key challenge remains integrating just transition thinking beyond energy into forestry, agriculture, and manufacturing. And then Vietnam's rates are a little bit higher. They are a little bit at an intermediate stage. As I mentioned, we can look at their experience to think more. But most advanced among the developing countries we analyze. Vietnam has a stronger legal framework with its labor code requiring union consultation and enterprise support law actively supporting firms and retraining. It is the 15.5 billion JTB targets facing coal from 50% to under 30% of their electricity in 2030. This again was part of the other paper, not in the comment, but I think it's obviously one came from the other and they are interrelated. So I think it's really useful perspective. And our plan is to update this. This was made a couple of years ago, so we want to update those numbers and continue adding more countries to this analysis. So in the Just Labor Transition Progress Scale, what it is we, as I said, we study 14 countries and we try to understand what are their situation, where are they at right now in terms of the just transition, in particular for labor markets, if they have included or not in the rules, like protections for workers, if their NDCs mention the workers, and so on. So from the 14 countries we identified, the only 2 countries that are advanced are Germany and the UK. The intermediate countries are Netherlands, New Zealand, US, and Vietnam. Here's the only developing country there. And then moderate Argentina, Colombia, Indonesia, South Africa, and Poland. And lastly, beginners, India, Nigeria, and Australia. So this is, again, this is for 2024 when we finish this paper. Perhaps there has been a lot of efforts happening already after that, but at least this is a snapshot of where we were at that point. And we need to, as I said, continue updating and adding more countries to have more context. But the point isn't to rank countries against each other, but to give a policymaker a diagnostic tool where are you now and what needs to happen to move forward and what other countries have done that you can perhaps learn from them and so on. And yeah, no country has reached peak. Even the most advanced have significant gaps in their just labor transition journey. So what are the recommendations and what's next? As I said at the beginning, no one size fits all. Just labor transition policies must be tailored to the specific local context, labor market structures, and development levels. Stakeholder engagement is essential. Bringing the communities, the workers, the unions must have a voice in the transition planning to ensure the social license that you need. And finance and policy coordination matter. Innovative financing and coordination interventions are critical for success. So you can, if you want to download the paper, there's a QR code, and I wanted to preview that there's some work coming soon. So it is on Just Labor Transition Toolkit, operationalizing the 5 key challenges into a systematic diagnostic tool for policymakers. That will be happening with Shamin Ibrahim, and it's something that we're working on, and yeah, I'm really excited about this, and I think it will be something that will be relevant for the Asian community, and I think I just realized I went a little bit fast, so we will have a lot of time for discussion. But as I said before, the global energy transition will need to be just, or there will be not be a transition. So that's what I have. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Louis, for that insightful and very comprehensive presentation. I've taken some notes here, and if I can sum up a little bit, the commentary highlights 5 key challenges in making the energy transition fair for workers. First, new green jobs don't necessarily match the jobs being lost from the fossil fuel industry in terms of skills, location, or timing. And second, policy approaches don't really translate easily across countries, especially from developed to developing countries, so context really matters. And third, a large share of the workforce remains outside of formal protection, so they're informal. And without targeted measures, energy transition may risk deepening existing inequalities and also vulnerabilities. And fourth, place-based industrial policies and often struggles to provide sustainable local jobs. And finally, all of this requires significant financing, which is the biggest challenge, and which remains the major constraint. And these challenges show that a just labor transition needs deliberate, well-coordinated policy design. So we can go right ahead with the discussion session. So for the viewers who would like to ask Louis questions about his commentary and presentation, or just about just labor transition in general, you can send them in the Q&A box below. But maybe I can start it off with a few questions that I have myself. So for context, according to the 8th ASEAN Energy Outlook, in ASEAN, fossil fuel jobs are expected to decline starting 2031. And many of the renewable energy jobs created will involve relocation of workers, especially since our E is geographically eccentric, as I have explained before. And more than that, the region is experiencing a shortage of tertiary level graduates in the fields of engineering, manufacturing, and construction. And this gap is also further compounded with the significant gender disparity. So these are just some of the challenges that ASEAN is facing. From the 5 challenges you outlined, are those challenges experienced both by developed and developing countries? And how did your research method identify the differences?
I mean, I think there's some similarities and there's some differences. And in particular, from those challenges that you were mentioning, I would say that I mean the challenge of having enough the fact that there's some sort of mismatch between the preparation of workers and or students that are going to come to the labor force. It is a big challenge, and it's across the world. Like there's some lack of enough graduating and so on. So that's something that we have to continue incentivizing. And I think in general, one of the big differences, as I mentioned, from global south and global north, is the fact that in the global north, when you don't have a job, most of the time you go to get some support from government. And in the global south, what it tends to happen is you enter the informal labor market. So you start producing and selling things in the streets, or like working like with informally and so on. So in some sense, the outside options tend to be different, but that's a key challenge, because many times that is like a vicious circle that doesn't happen in the global north. So in some sense, in that regard, I think that's a big difference between how workers that are like want to transition or want to be part of this are like perhaps like if you are unemployed and then you are offered trainings and so on, and it could be easier to come if you're from the global north and you're having support, whether if you have to meet your livelihood and you don't have time to be retrained and so on. So those I think is like the biggest like differences is how the labor market structure in developing countries relative to developed countries.
Yeah, I think it's interesting what you said. There's a lack of government safety net. I can say, even in the global north, if someone is unemployed, they can seek help or training from the government. Where in the south, they just go into informal jobs with no safety nets. And what's important is we have to focus on preparation of workforce and students who are trying to get into our e-jobs to enter the energy jobs. We need to focus on education and also reskilling. I think that's to sum it up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if may I also, I mean, something that we have to be also aware is that not all the jobs are going to be in the energy sector. So there's jobs that are going to happen and arise in the energy sector, and it's happening, but there are going to be other non-brown jobs that could also be relevant. And in particular, the care economy and the services and so on are getting much more important. Well, like we have better technology and so on. So in some sense, understanding that like the transition is not like going from a brown job to a green job. Perhaps it's going from a brown job to a non-brown job. It could be to be relevant. And then some of the people that are or and some new hires that you were mentioning that are like being trained right now and so on could go to the green jobs, and that will like basically shift all the economy and the workforce onto cleaner and more jobs that are like more less energy intensive, or at least less brown jobs. But we have to be careful that it's not like one to one, and like all the workers that we have, like the coal miners, that we're going to be able to transition them into the energy, like the clean energy and so on. It's not as simple as that. And then there's also the manufacturing is evolving, a lot of things is happening, and they're getting like more specialized and so on. And there's a lot of opportunities in those areas where like students and people that are planning to enter the workforce could have opportunities beyond the green jobs. And yeah, but yeah, I think it's yes, some jobs are rising, and a lot of them will be rising the green jobs, but also some of them will be beyond the energy sector, and that's a big consideration.
All right. Thank you for adding that. Actually, it's very interesting. I didn't think of that. What most important is how we look at the people coming from the brown jobs, right? Transitioning to not only energy but also other sectors that they want to transition to. So we have quite a lot of questions in the Q&A box. I think we'll move on to that first. We have one question. Um, I'll read it out to you and then you can answer. I'm quite surprised to see the informal labor force is very high, 60% and 76% in Indonesia and Vietnam, respectively. Could you please elaborate on this, especially its definition? Another one is how can we formalize them or how to properly measure and implement policies for them?
This have to, I made a caveat. This is all the informal labor numbers that we mentioned are at the whole economy, not only in particular for the energy sector. So this is like a relevant thing to mention. Is like all the economy as a whole in the global south, both including informal sector as the production, but also informal contracts. So what happens a lot is like you are subcontracted, you don't have the same like benefits as a formal worker. So that's include both. The numbers are like both like what is informality, and that comes from some guidelines from ILO and so on. But yeah, so it's including first not only energy sector, and second both the informal sector and the informal workers in the formal sector. So that's like people that are under like that they don't receive the same benefits and the same things are considered informal in that regard. Like they're not protected as the same as the formal workers that have like a social protection and like unemployment or like so insurance and so on. But yeah, there was another question there. One is if I can elaborate more what the data is coming out and how to formalize them. There's many important things. One is try to incentivize and help gain access to opportunities to that. And many times that is like a way that has been successfully done. Perhaps is like giving some sort of support from the government as paid internships or pay training like the government can do some like there's some successful experiences where the government gives support to the companies to hire students and train them, or like not students like early workers, and with that they have the opportunity to develop their skills and then bring them to the rest of to the labor force. And I think that's one. The other thing is also trying to simplify some of the regulations in terms of compliance and so on, because that makes it really difficult to small companies and small entrepreneurs and so on and they tend to avoid becoming formal, and there's like the informality trap, or they don't want to grow enough because they don't want to face like the difficulty bureaucracies and so on regulations. So those are some of the ways that you can actually, like, if you simplified being part of the the formal sector, and help them, like, if you offer some tax credits or some ways of your return of your taxes, to be sure that they are easy and accessible, so there's not such a big burden that they don't want to be part of it. And then and there's different incentives that they could be done, but in particular is like giving opportunities to workers so they don't have to rely on the informal sector.
Right. So if I can sum up a little bit, just two main points is that we have to incentivize the access to opportunities, and that is can be helped by the government. And the second was this to simplify regulations for small companies, for SMSEs, so they don't feel burdened to for these workers. I think we'll move on to we have a lot of questions. We'll move on to the next question. Um, let's see. Given the heterogeneity of labor markets in developing economies, how can countries tailor just labor transition policies without over-relying on models from advanced economies? I think this is one of the points that you mentioned in your commentary, so please.
Yeah, I mean, that's difficult, but something that, for example, Argentina and some other countries have done is like include the informal workers to be part of the discussion since the beginning. So in some sense, there's this they call it like I don't remember right now, but basically they have unions for informal workers to be represented and to be taken into account in the new development of new policies and industrial policies that will be happening. And with that, like, they feel represented and they are more like showing their concerns, and that's something that could be taken into account. In general, we need more like research from the global south, and here I am representing, also I'm part of the research network that I mentioned before, and the research network is a south-to-south collaboration effort that we're doing. It has funding from the global north, but what we want to empower is researchers from the global south to do their own research and to tailor to their country. So adding, like, perhaps, yes, learning from the power system modeling being done in the US or in Europe or in other places, but at the same time adding the perspectives of the informal labor force into them, and having, so and parallelly I'm working in a paper, for example, of including the informal sector into a model that models like general equilibrium models to understand how workers move from one sector to another, going through informality and so on. So in some sense, we need to develop more models. There are some out there, and we have to take advantage of them, but like calibrated and use them for our particular context. I think that's a really important issue. I mean, we can use as a backbone, or like as a starting point, some of the models that have like that are standard in the literature from the really like IBLEs or whatever, like really good models that are already proven, but tailor them to the particular perspectives of each country and how they work and what are the important things that perhaps are different. They're not, I mean, global south is not exactly the same. Within the global south, even like in the same regions, there are coal intensive countries, but there are also oil and gas intensive countries, and those are different. The challenges that they face are different. And also, for example, like there's countries that are producing a lot of fossil fuels, but they're not using them themselves, but exporting them, so their revenues depend on them, and so on. So the context is really important. So try to incorporate that into your analysis. And I think that's one of the big issues is try to develop the new tools within the global south, and to be like use them in a way that is like focused and not just like bringing the tools that were designed for the global north, and about like designing policies, not necessarily the models that to understand them, but the policies. Many times things that are like in the first best scenario, or the way that they design them in the Europe, they don't necessarily, or in the US and so on, they don't necessarily translate the same thing, and they could actually add burden and some of the things that I was talking about regulation. So tailor things to the context of the global south.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. You talked about how we are allowed to look at best practices from the global north, but the challenge is how to translate to our context in the global south, and that needs, I guess, incentives to further dissect and also match with the local context. And you mentioned about labor unions, and in your paper, you emphasized inclusive decision making, and one of them is through labor unions and labor institutions. But I'm curious, how um, do you advance inclusive decision making in contexts like the global south or developing countries where a large share of the workers are informal, or where labor institutions or unions are maybe weaker? So how can they, advance their own opinions to influence decision making for just labor transition?
I will again go back to the example from Vietnam, where they put it on law that they have to require bringing representatives, and they have to. So I think that's one of the things that is key. Many times there are like a lot of decision processing and decision making happening without the people that are affected in the table on the table. So that's like a biggie for me. It's like a really something that we need to consider is the fact that it's not only consultations, but also having them there to express their concerns. I know again the Vietnam example I think is a good one, but also the one from Spain that I mentioned. I know that it's not in the global south, but nonetheless I think there's a lot of things that we can learn from their experience. What they did is they identified like they're going to close a mine in a particular location. What else could they do there? So what are the additional opportunities? And then how we can actually use the same workers that used to work there to actually to do the cleaning and the repurposing of the mine and so on. So in some sense, what I'm saying is like bringing the people that are involved to the decision-making process. So I think that's something that I really care, and I think is identified as something. And then, as I mentioned, go back to the Argentina example. They have these comunidades where they bring like the informal workers to the table, and they discuss. And the most important thing is this is not only like a check, like, oh yeah, we do as consultation. I mean, that's like that's only uh, giving false hopes. I think what it has to do is like they have to be part of the decision making process, and bringing them. And the way to do it is, I mean, some sort of affirmative action, put it first in law and started implementing, and do a couple of examples, show how it actually helps everybody. Because if the workers and the communities are involved, they decided they actually want the industrial policy that is coming to them. They are actually like it's something that they desire, and not something that like some government thought that putting a white elephant in the middle of nowhere would be useful. It is actually more empowering. They use the services that are produced from those. I mean, they participate. They are part taken into account. So in some sense, what I'm saying is, I think many times the private sector and the government that are like perhaps having a little bit more to say in this, where the industrial policy is going to happen, or where they tend to forget that if like the community and the workers are not aligned, they don't want to be part of this, perhaps then it's not going to work. So in some sense, for them, even for their own interests, for their businesses, and for everything to work, having them taking ownership and part of this, I think is important.
Yeah, thank you for the answer. Thank you also for bringing up the examples from Vietnam, from Spain. I think what how we can sum this up is that inclusion must be intentional, either if it's from the industry itself or from the government through laws to protect the workers. So yeah. So I think we'll move on to the next question from the Q&A box. We have two questions from Beni Suryadi. The first one is, in ASEAN, the energy transition is expected to create new jobs, but also risk displacing workers in fossil fuel-related sectors. Based on your paper, what are the most critical policy measures to ensure that this transition becomes a just labor transition, not only a technological transitions? And the second question is, many ASEAN member states are still balancing energy security, affordability, and decarbonization. How can governments design labor transition policies that are realistic for developing economies?
I mean, there's many different answers depending on the context, but yeah, in general, it's like one of the core issues of this is like the like the brown jobs tend to be like coal communities and even oil and gas and so tend to be enclaves. So in some sense, even though like they are like small or like in small relative to the countries, communities where there's like all the production and all the community depend on the coal or like the fossil fuels. So in some sense, I think that's why we need to care a lot, even though perhaps like in the macro perspective, the numbers are not as big. This is like people that they have built their livelihood, they have been doing there, and they have been providing the energy that we have used and we have thrived and we have. So in some sense, I think we have a need to protect those communities and help them thrive. So in some sense, one of the things that I mentioned, there's this complexity that it was developed by. The Atlas of Complexity is a concept that was developed by Harvard, and there's a similar developed by MIT. But in some sense, what it did is they went and tried to identify all the potential of each country. So like what are the materials that they have, what are like the industries that they could develop and so on. So in some sense, and then they did the same thing but for the energy transition. So there's one called Greenplexity, and what are the critical minerals that they are available, what are like the processes, what exists in each country. So it's like an atlas for to understanding this, and trying to find like alternative industries that could be developed, trying to be part. Perhaps you don't have to, I mean, producing all the solar panels in try to develop an industry like that would be crazy in the sense that given the advantage that China already has and so on. But perhaps getting outside of the value chain is long, and there's many pieces where they could like people could go and think. So that would be a way of identifying like what these communities could and what type of industrial policy you can do in these communities to help them transition. And then I think in general, including, as I said, like the workers in the process and helping perhaps there's many times like unemployed workers, like you close the coal mine or you close like the coal power plant, and then these workers are stranded. How to like you can do job banks to help them identify other opportunities and so on. So that's a really important part. And again, I don't want to. I said that we don't have to replicate the global north to the global south, but the Spain exercise is really interesting, and they have really successful numbers of transitioning workers that were in brown jobs to green jobs, or at least to help develop these new industries in those communities. The second question I'm bleeping, can you remind me what was the question?
Second question is, many ASEAN member states are still balancing energy security, affordability, and decarbonization. How can governments design labor transition policies that are realistic for developing countries, economies?
Yes, that's a big one. Like you have to balance, and then you have to balance. Like the energy transition is already costly, and then at the same time, all of these countries you have other competing interests. So the budgets are tight. There's fiscal the fiscal space not necessarily that slack to actually to do more things. But I think you have to take the opportunity to find policies that boost the energy transition and to solve some of the energy affordabilities, like getting good livelihoods for workers and so on, that can help, like even if the prices change or so, they have like enough income to contract like to those things and so on. But in general, I think yeah, I mean that it has to be try to find the things that are like complementary and that they don't perhaps add as much fiscal push. But the good thing is, like, if you incorporate the workers and the communities into the decision-making process, and then you do something that they're happy with, and then you partner with the private sector, and you do like the correct like active labor market policies, and the you help them, perhaps it's not as costly, and it could be really successful. So what I'm saying is, like, if this is something that they want, perhaps and you put this guide rails and the safeguards are not as costly as giving away money or things like that, but like you can leverage that.
Right, thank you so much for the answer. So I think it all comes back to how we can include the workers into the decision-making process, because at the end of the day, the policies are for them. They are producing energy, they are shifting energy, but we also need to balance security, affordability, and decarbonization. So we still have a lot of questions in the Q&A box. The next question is, what role should the private sector play in supporting a just labor transition beyond simply investing in clean energy projects? I think that's very interesting.
I mean, yeah, I think they as I said, they have to be co-participants. I think we need from all. And one of the things is like try to see and understand, and for their own stakeholders and their own like profits and so on, incorporating the needs of the communities where they will like perhaps want to invest their money and so on, where the government is going to give them credits or like subsidies and so on. They I mean, they should try to incorporate again like, the needs of those communities and so on, in order to make them more successful and more productive. And I think that that's, instead of getting in cycles where like a government decides like where to put some industrial policy, some private sector companies receive that funding, and then they start developing there, and it's something that not necessarily was like wanted or needed in that space. Is if you, that's like a bad cycle that you don't want to get to, and like then nobody use those, or like they don't develop as much and so on. It's the other way around. Like if you since the beginning identify those, and the private companies could be also an advocate for this, to incorporate, like to be a joint decision process, such that they can also thrive in their profits. I mean, at the end, the private sector, what they want is to have consumers. They want to have more to sell and to develop and so on. And the only way to do it is also thinking that like the workers are also consumers, and are also an important key, and they are also a part of their production processes. So the most they take into consideration them, they could have a really good cycle that could like be better for everybody. And in general, I think being aware of the fact that in general, like formal firms tend to have higher productivity. So in some sense, try to incentivize, even though there are some costs that perhaps they have to bear at the beginning in terms to formalizing and so on. There's these positive things that they could actually end up happening for like, if workers are taking care, they have health benefits and things like that, they tend to be more productive, and more productive becomes better production, and it's better for everything. So I think in general, many times they think of the initial costs as like like stop to actually start formalizing, but at least the evidence is like it shows it's like whenever the formal firms tend to be more productive, and more productive means better having better production and having more profits and so on. So I think that's a way of thinking is like at the end your workers are your inputs to your production, and caring for them is something that should be relevant.
Right. Thank you so much for that answer, Luis. I think we're gonna reel back a little bit and then see from a more regional perspective. Um, from the ASEAN perspective, we see that the energy transition is not only as a decarbonization agenda, but also an economic and also social transformation. And based on your research, what are the most practical steps that regional institutions like ASEAN or ACE can take up to help member states to ensure that clean energy investment also delivers decent jobs, protects affected workers, and also avoids creating new forms of inequality?
Something that perhaps is an example from another country, but that could be helpful is South Africa. Somebody from ESCOM, the power system, the utilities, was telling me, and that this is what she's a co-author in the paper, Mandiran Barros, something that she told me that it was really powerful is to think that for many of these communities, the utilities and the mines and everything are the good guys because they are the ones that are providing their livelihoods. So they have been in their communities, they have worked for them, they have been like is their way of living, and sometimes understanding that you cannot come and say like those are the bad guys that are polluting our world, and like we have to stop producing electricity with the coal or so on. So it's thinking the fact that for them is their livelihoods, and they have been working there, and they have been is part of how they have done things for a while, and understanding the fact that now we're not going to produce electricity with coal, or like we're not going to use gas and so on as much because we realize that it has a negative effect. So I think one of the things is helping socialize and perhaps educate the communities to understand this, and also identify what are the alternatives. Because if you come and say like we're going to close a coal plant today, but you don't have an alternative plan of what like communities will not want that, like they will not be happy with it, and then try to be careful that like the global south has to have a little bit of a leeway in the sense like the speed of the transition has to be slower, as you were saying, 2035 or beyond. In some sense, I mean, it's a planned transition, has to be step by step, but part of it is ramping renewables, ramping the green, while slowly getting rid of you don't like. There's some examples of what happened in Indonesia initially, and in South Africa when they tried to close coal plants immediately, and then there's power outages. There's no enough reliability of the electricity and so on. So in some sense we have to be careful not to go too fast. Don't follow only because follow the big box that the global north wants to show for mitigation, but like it has to be a planned process where you slowly get rid of this and educate the people and bring new alternatives for these communities to be taken into account. So I think socializing why is important and what is the alternatives that they could face. I think I would say like the key way of Asian and others could play, and yeah, understanding the incentives, understanding how people think, and like the fact that for them really is they don't yet grasp and understand many times what is like why they have to stop doing what they have been doing and what they perhaps their parents did before, and like their communities have thrived on. So in some sense, and in particular because they provide an important service, and we are having this conversation because we have electricity and we have fossil fuels that are backing still our grids and our and everything. So in some sense we have to be aware of that, and provide. Obviously now renewables are getting cheaper and cheaper by the minute, so that's incredible. But then what is the livelihoods that they are going to have, and that's how you gain the social license.
I agree. I think to some what ASEAN or maybe ACE can help is through socializing and also giving awareness that, oh, this energy transition is happening. And with our projections, like we shared earlier, 2030, it's gonna fossil fuel jobs are gonna be lost. And maybe if I could share a few regional frameworks in ASEAN that we in the regional level we have established that we also have the ASEAN Declaration on Promoting Green Jobs for Equity and Inclusive Growth of ASEAN Community, which was established in 2018. We also have the ASEAN Technical and Vocational Education and Training Council. And last year, we established the joint statement from ASEAN Labor Ministries meeting for green jobs for sustainable and inclusive ASEAN workforce. So I think that from those existing frameworks, from those existing agreements, we can build from that and give more awareness or recommendations, better recommendations for the ASEAN member states. So we're nearing the end of our session. I guess I have one last question for you. You mentioned about the Just Labor Transition Scale, JLTPS, on your commentary. And the scale compares progress across countries. How do you balance? I guess my first question is, how do you measure? How is the mechanism of the JLTPS, and how do you balance comparability with the need for context-specific pathways?
That's a really good thing, and we are. I mean, the initial it was more like a qualitative analysis where we measure by like how many times or like not how many times, but like when there were policies mentioned and like were there like if they have social protections for workers and what type of things. But as you said, it's kind of difficult. The context is not the same in global north and global south and so on. And in general, what we did initially is we saw like what would be the optimal path where you have protections for all workers, you have like both active labor market policies, social protections, all these things already in place, and how far you are from having all those things in your regulations, and that's a little bit how we thought about like if like for example Australia has a really bad number in our scale because they were having at least at that point they were a little bit like really far away from the from protecting workers, and they were doing a little bit like really ad hoc policies and so on. So in some sense, what I'm saying is like what we try to do is to think of first best and how far you are from there, and how policies you have enacted, and that's why naturally most of the developing countries or like the global south countries rank like a little bit behind because they are starting their journey. So in some sense, but as I said, it's not to use it as comparative with other countries, but comparative with yourself, like how much I can advance to get to that place where I have all the protections, I have the active labor market policies like job banks, like retraining, like reskilling, how I'm getting there, and what are the policies that perhaps will bring me to a better ranking would be the best. It's not like ranking against other countries, but more like a path for you. I think that would be like how we thought about our tool.
The perspective from the GLTBS is not how you compare your country to other countries, but it's more like how you measure yourself and where you are in the scale, right? And how do you move forward with that?
Yes, and in some sense, having compared to other countries is useful in the sense that you can
Mhm.
see what other policies these other countries have done, and in particular the fact that Vietnam is a little bit more advanced in our scale because it has included all these protections. It has mentioned worker protection in their NDCs. It has put requirements. It has like all of those things could be like, oh, if I'm a global south country, I can see what the example of Vietnam is and how they got there, and try to incorporate that into my planning. But it's not to think in a way that we are definitely not trying to make you countries compete or think. It's more like a North Star where like if you have all these good policies already in place, you will be protecting your workforce at the same time actually getting to have a energy transition that is inclusive and equitable.
Great. Thank you so much, Liz, for that. I think the GLTPS is very interesting, and if the viewers want to learn more about the transition scale, you can find out more in EDF's website because I've read quite a few from EDF's website. So we've come to our end of the discussion. Actually, it's 8 p.m. now in Jakarta. So thank you very much, Luis, for your presentation, also discussion. And I know that a lot of you here still have questions. We have still 11 questions actually in the Q&A box. You can maybe reach to Luis directly, if that's all right.
That would be perfect. I would love to, and we can refine and learn. I mean, I'm open to learn from all of you. I really want to appreciate the fact that you are in that evening taking the time to be here and learning, and I'm really excited to continue engaging with you all. And if you have questions, happy to answer them. And also, if there's things that you would like to see, as I said, I'm working with Shamin on developing this like a toolkit. Part of the dialogue, we started thinking of what are all the like different type of policies, more like active labor market policies, social protections, and cross-cutting enablers. So in some sense, we want to understand like for different contexts what policies should be used, and that's something that we're working on. So ideas, and I would love to read a little bit more of the frameworks that you mentioned from ASEAN. So I'm really excited, and it was a really interesting conversation, and really thank you for all your questions.
All right. Thank you so much for that, Luis. I'm very happy. I'm glad you're here, that you're very excited to continue this conversation. And I would like to say thank you to everyone and the participants for the engaging discussion and also for asking a lot of questions. So yeah, I think I'll close and I'll give it back to Aisha. So Aisha, over to you, please.
Thank you so much, Ms. Natania. Thank you so much, Mr. Luis, for the engaging discussions. We have witnessed various of questions, and they're all dynamic from different participants, and they're all engaged with the discussions that have been that we have witnessed together. And I am particularly engaged through the intriguing discussion regarding how these challenges require inclusion of workers and safety into decision-making processes, as well as how to proceed in line with transition skills and workers' protection. And therefore, before we conclude our talk show today, I would like to invite both Mr. Luis and Ms. Natania to a brief photo session, which will also be guided with me. And so, Mr. Luis and Ms. Natania, please get ready, and we'll start with the photo session. All right, okay. So I would like to count in 3, 2, 1 for the photo session. All right, we'll start in 3, 2, and 1. All right, okay, maybe just one more in 3, 2, and 1. All right, thank you so much, Ms. Natania, and thank you so much, Mr. Luis, for the discussions as well as photo session just recently. And definitely thank you very much to everyone. That concludes our ARNECC Live podcast for today's episode on just inclusive energy transition and the labor transition discussion as well. And thank you very much for everyone who have engaged throughout the question and answer session. We hope that the discussion has offered you new insights and valuable perspectives for all our participants today. And again, please stay connected with us throughout our social media channels, newsletter, and website in order to keep up with the latest updates from ARNECC as well as the developments within the ASEAN's energy and climate landscape. Therefore, I am Aisha Adibazmiar. Have a wonderful evening, and thank you so much. We look forward to welcoming you all to our upcoming ARNECC webinars episodes later on. Thank you so much and have a great evening. Goodbye.
Thank you.